Here's a detailed overview of Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order. Here, I will provide a comprehensive, in-depth summary and analysis of the book's key ideas, structure, and arguments that would serve as a detailed overview. Detailed overview of The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. Introduction. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, is renowned for his macroeconomic insights and keen historical analysis. The Changing World Order: Why Nations Succeed and Fail, is the culmination of decades of research into the patterns that have shaped the rise and fall of empires, economies, and markets. In this book, Dalio combines economic history, geopolitical analysis, and financial theory to offer a framework for understanding how the world order changes, and what it means for nations and individuals. Dalio's central thesis is that world orders, like empires and economies, follow cyclical patterns. By identifying the markers of these cycles, we can better prepare for what lies ahead. The book draws from the histories of past empires, Dutch, British, American, Chinese, and analyzes the current shifts in global power, especially the rivalry between the United States and China. Structure and key arguments. 1. The concept of the world order. Dalio begins by defining world order as the system of rules, institutions, and power structures that govern global relations at any given time. These orders are typically established by the most powerful nation or coalition of nations, which sets the rules of the game in its own favor. Each world order is born, matures, and eventually declines, making way for a new one. 2. The big cycle of rise and decline. Dalio identifies a big cycle that underpins the rise and fall of nations and empires. The cycle typically includes the following phases. The rise characterized by strong leadership, innovation, education, and competitiveness. The top marked by peak prosperity, wealth gaps, and complacency. The decline featuring high debt, internal conflict, and loss of competitiveness. The transition, the emergence of a new power or order. Dalio's model is data-driven, drawing from 500 years of history. He uses economic, military, political, and social indicators to track the trajectory of nations through these cycles. 3. The drivers of national success and failure. Dalio argues that the success or failure of nations depends on several key factors. Education and innovation. Nations that invest in education and foster innovation are more likely to rise. Competitiveness. The ability to compete economically and militarily is crucial for sustaining power. Order and rule of law. Strong institutions and respect for the rule of law contribute to stability and prosperity. Debt and financial health. Excessive debt and financial imbalances are precursors to decline. Internal cohesion. Societal unity enables nations to respond effectively to challenges. External challenges. Wars, both hot and cold, often determine the fate of world orders. 4. Historical case studies. Dalio delves deeply into the histories of major empires. The Dutch Empire, pioneers of capitalism and trade, their rise and fall were tied to innovation, commerce, and debt cycles. The British Empire, their industrial revolution and colonial reach made them dominant, but overexpansion and 2 world wars eroded their power. The American Empire. Post-World War II, the U.S. established the current world order, but is now facing challenges from within: inequality, debt, and without China's rise. The Chinese Empire. Historically, China has gone through several cycles. Its recent resurgence is positioning it as a challenger to U.S. dominance. 5. The role of debt, money, and credit cycles. A major portion of the book is dedicated to explaining how debt and credit cycles influence the rise and fall of empires. Dalio explains that easy money and credit spur growth but can lead to asset bubbles and debt crises. When debts become unsustainable, defaults and restructuring lead to economic downturns, often accompanied by social unrest and political upheaval. The management of monetary policy, printing money, interest rates becomes critical in navigating these crises. 6. The internal and external order. Dalio distinguishes between internal order, social cohesion, political stability and external order, international relations, military balance. He notes that declining empires often face growing internal conflict, inequality, political polarization, and external threats, rising rivals, wars. 7. The U.S.-China dynamic. One of the book's central themes is the shifting balance of power between the United States and China. Dalio compares the current situation to previous handovers of global leadership and analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of both nations. The U.S. has advantages in innovation and global influence but is hampered by internal divisions and high debt. China is rapidly catching up in economic and military power, with a focus on education, technology, and infrastructure. 8. Preparing for the future. Dalio concludes by urging readers to recognize the patterns of history and prepare for a world in transition. He recommends diversification of investments, understanding macroeconomic cycles, and fostering resilience at the personal, organizational, and national levels. Chapter by chapter analysis. Chapter 1. The Big Cycle in a Tiny Nutshell. Dalio introduces the big cycle of empires and outlines the main phases. He explains why understanding these cycles is critical for investors, policymakers, and citizens alike. The chapter sets the stage for the in-depth historical analysis that follows. Chapter 2. Money, credit, debt, and economic cycles. This chapter delves into the mechanics of money and credit, explaining how central banks and governments use these tools to manage economies. Dalio shows how mismanagement can lead to booms and busts, which in turn influence the broader cycles of rise and decline. Chapter 3. The Changing Value of Money. Dalio discusses inflation, deflation, and the erosion of currency value over time. He provides historical examples of currency debasement and its consequences for societies and world orders. Chapter 4. The Rise and Fall of Major Empires. A comprehensive historical tour. This chapter examines the Dutch, British, and American empires in detail, identifying common patterns in their ascent and decline. Chapter 5. The Rise of China. Dalio describes China's historical cycles and its recent resurgence as a global power. He analyzes China's economic, military, and technological strategies, and considers the implications for the current world order. Chapter 6. The U.S.-China rivalry. Building on the previous chapters, Dalio compares the U.S. and China across multiple dimensions: economic strength, military power, innovation, social cohesion, and political stability. Chapter 7. The Internal Order: Why Nations Succeed or Fail. This chapter focuses on internal factors, education, innovation, social mobility, and governance, that determine a nation's trajectory within the big cycle. Chapter 8. The External Order: Geopolitics and War. Dalio analyzes the role of war, hot and cold, in reshaping world orders. He discusses historical examples and draws parallels to current geopolitical tensions. Chapter 9. Debt crises and economic downturns. A deep dive into the causes and consequences of debt crises. Dalio explains how excessive debt leads to economic downturns, and how these episodes often coincide with major shifts in world order. Chapter 10. The Nature of Political and Social Conflict. This chapter examines how growing inequality, political polarization, and social unrest contribute to the decline of empires. Chapter 11. Technology and Innovation as Drivers of Change. Dalio highlights the central role of technological progress in the rise of nations and the dangers of stagnation. Chapter 12. Education, Values, and Social Capital. An exploration of how education, cultural values, and social cohesion contribute to national resilience and adaptability. Chapter 13. Preparing for the Storm. Dalio offers practical advice for individuals, investors, and policymakers on how to navigate periods of transition and uncertainty. Chapter 14. The New World Order: What Comes Next. Speculation and scenario analysis on the future of the global order, considering possible outcomes of the U.S.-China rivalry and other global trends. Chapter 15. Reflections and Lessons from History. Dalio concludes with a summary of key lessons from history and a call to action for readers to apply these insights in their own lives. Key takeaways and philosophical underpinnings. Historical patterns are predictable. Dalio's most important contribution is his data-driven approach to history. He shows that while the details may differ, the broad patterns of rise and decline repeat across centuries. Debt and money matter. Monetary and fiscal policy are not just technical matters, they are central to the fate of nations. Mismanagement of debt and currency is often the catalyst for decline. Education and innovation are crucial. Nations that prioritize learning, adaptability, and innovation are better equipped to rise and sustain their dominance. Internal division is deadly. The decline of empires is often hastened by internal strife, inequality, political conflict, and loss of shared purpose. Geopolitics is a game of power. Dalio's realist perspective emphasizes that global order is ultimately determined by power, economic, military, and technological. Prepare for change. Periods of transition are inevitable. The prudent response is not panic, but preparation, diversifying investments, strengthening institutions, and cultivating resilience. Application for investors and policymakers. Dalio's book is not just a historical treatise, it is a practical guide for navigating uncertainty. Investors are urged to diversify globally, understand macro trends, and avoid excessive leverage. Policymakers are reminded of the importance of strong institutions, fiscal responsibility, and social cohesion. Critiques and controversies. Some critics argue that Dalio's cyclical model oversimplifies complex historical realities, and that predicting the future is inherently fraught. Others caution that his focus on power dynamics may underemphasize the role of ideas, culture, and chance in shaping history. Nevertheless, The Changing World Order has been widely praised for its ambitious scope, accessibility, and relevance. Conclusion. Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order is a sweeping, data-driven exploration of how nations rise and fall. By synthesizing economics, history, and geopolitics, Dalio provides a framework for understanding the challenges of our time and the transitions ahead. His message is clear. History leaves clues. By studying past cycles, we can better prepare for the future, and perhaps even shape it.